Welcome to the Story Atelier, the place where we transform the most captivating stories into unforgettable experiences. Here, you'll dive into tales filled with inspiration, suspense, and unexpected twists, from profound life lessons to journeys exploring the depths of the human spirit. Each story is more than just words, it's a gateway to a new world waiting for you to discover. Hit that subscribe button today and turn on notifications to join our community of story lovers. Your support isn't just our motivation to keep creating, it helps the channel grow and bring even more incredible content to life. Thank you for being a part of the Story Atelier. Let's make every story a moment to remember. Today, we're bringing you an incredible and thought-provoking story. Judge sentences innocent black man to 60 years. What he learns next changes everything. This is a tale of justice, redemption, and the relentless pursuit of truth. What begins as a devastating miscarriage of justice unravels into a shocking revelation that shakes the entire system to its core. Stay tuned as we take you through every twist and turn of this gripping journey, a story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about right and wrong. Let's dive in and uncover the truth behind this extraordinary case. The courtroom in Portland, Oregon, was packed to capacity on a cloudy spring morning. The air buzzed with an almost electric tension as Judge Alan Thatcher, a stoic figure in his mid-60s with a reputation for handing down severe sentences, took his place on the bench. His gray eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over the crowded room. His presence alone commanded respect. His 40-year career as a judge a testament to his unyielding commitment to justice, or so everyone believed. At the defense table, 27-year-old Ethan Carter sat stiffly, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and despite his best efforts to keep a neutral expression, a flicker of fear betrayed him. Ethan, a young high school teacher, had spent the past 6 months in a relentless battle to prove his innocence after being charged with the armed robbery of a downtown art gallery, a crime that had left one security guard in critical condition. "Mr. Carter," Judge Thatcher began, his voice firm yet devoid of emotion, "you stand convicted by a jury of your peers for crimes that have caused significant harm to this community. Evidence presented at your trial painted a picture of deliberate and calculated actions, for which you have shown no remorse." Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes darting to his mother, who sat in the back row of the gallery. Her hands were clasped tightly in prayer, tears streaming silently down her face. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Ethan had maintained his innocence from the moment of his arrest. "I didn't do this," he'd repeated to anyone who would listen. But the world seemed intent on ignoring him. Judge Thatcher paused, his gaze briefly softening as he glanced toward the victim's family seated nearby. "This court cannot and will not overlook the seriousness of your actions. I hereby sentence you to 55 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 25 years. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed throughout the silent room. Gasps rippled through the gallery, followed by the hushed murmur of spectators and the frantic scribbling of reporters. Ethan remained seated, his expression blank as if the weight of the sentence hadn't yet settled on his shoulders. His mother let out a heart-wrenching sob, but Ethan's gaze remained fixed on Judge Thatcher, his lips pressed into a thin line. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan was led away in shackles. His lawyer, Mark Fields, a public defender with a tired face and thinning hair, muttered something about an appeal. But Ethan wasn't listening. The world around him seemed distant, almost unreal. All he could think about was the evidence that had condemned him, evidence he knew was a lie. Judge Alan Thatcher sat in his private chambers late one evening, the muted hum of Portland's streets outside barely audible through the thick walls. His desk was cluttered with case files, most of them destined for review before his impending retirement. Yet his mind lingered on one file in particular, Ethan Carter. Though Thatcher had presided over hundreds of cases during his career, this one refused to fade into the recesses of his mind. It wasn't the media attention or the public outrage, it was the nagging feeling he couldn't shake. Something about the case didn't sit right. Pouring himself a glass of scotch, Thatcher leaned back in his chair and opened Ethan's case file again. The evidence against Ethan had seemed airtight: grainy surveillance footage of someone matching his build leaving the scene, witness testimonies placing him near the gallery, and a mysterious tip that led police to a storage unit registered in his name, where stolen artwork was recovered. But Thatcher had been in the game long enough to know that airtight cases weren't always foolproof. Meanwhile, in the state penitentiary, Ethan was adjusting to his grim new reality. The cold, sterile walls of his cell were a far cry from the classroom where he once taught literature to eager high schoolers. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he clung to his innocence with a fervor that surprised even himself. One evening, as Ethan sat in the dim light of his cell, a guard approached. "Carter," the man grunted. "You've got a visitor." Ethan's heart skipped. Visitors were rare. His mother hadn't been able to make the trip in weeks. He was led into the visitors' area, where a man in a dark suit waited. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through Ethan. "Mr. Carter," the man said, extending a hand. "My name is David Cole. I'm a private investigator." Ethan frowned but shook his hand. "What do you want?" Cole leaned forward, his voice low. "I think you were set up, and I want to help prove it." Back in Thatcher's chambers, his restless curiosity drove him to delve deeper into the case. As he sifted through police reports, a small, seemingly insignificant detail caught his attention: an entry in the evidence log for a burner phone recovered during an unrelated drug raid around the same time as the gallery robbery. The phone's serial number matched the one used to make the anonymous tip that had implicated Ethan. Thatcher sat bolt upright. "That's not possible," he murmured. "If the phone had been in police custody, it couldn't have been used to tip off authorities about Ethan's supposed involvement." Fueled by this discovery, Thatcher requested access to the drug raid's full case file. As he reviewed it, his unease deepened. The arresting officer in the raid was Detective Martin Hayes, the lead investigator in Ethan's case. Thatcher's pulse quickened. The same officer handling both cases wasn't damning on its own, but the timeline was suspicious. Was it a coincidence, or something more sinister? Ethan and Cole met several more times, each session unearthing more inconsistencies. Cole had tracked down a former gallery employee who initially identified a different man as the suspect before changing their story under police pressure. The employee, clearly rattled, told Cole that Detective Hayes had coerced them, threatening legal action if they didn't cooperate. "Why would Hayes do this?" Ethan asked during one of their meetings. His frustration was palpable. Cole's expression darkened. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. But one thing is clear. This isn't just negligence. This was deliberate." Their conversations reignited a flicker of hope in Ethan, though he tried to temper his expectations. He'd already been betrayed by the system once. As Thatcher continued his own investigation, he found himself at a crossroads. Reopening the case would mean exposing his doubts to the public, a move that could tarnish his reputation and invite scrutiny into his entire career. Yet, the deeper he dug, the more convinced he became that Ethan Carter was innocent. The breakthrough came late one night. Thatcher had requested surveillance footage from a nearby business on the night of the robbery, footage that hadn't been included in the trial. When the files arrived, Thatcher's hands trembled as he loaded the video. There, in the grainy footage, was a figure matching Detective Hayes' description entering the gallery's alley entrance less than an hour before the robbery. It was undeniable. Ethan Carter hadn't robbed the gallery. Detective Hayes had framed him. The revelations weighed heavily on Thatcher. He knew that bringing this to light wouldn't just exonerate Ethan, it would unravel years of cases handled by Hayes, potentially exposing a web of corruption within the Portland Police Department. It would also place Thatcher in the crosshairs of powerful adversaries. But for the first time in years, Thatcher felt something he hadn't in a long time, a moral imperative to do what was right. The chapter closes with Thatcher drafting a motion to reopen Ethan Carter's case, his pen pressing into the paper with unshakable resolve. No matter the cost, he whispered to himself, justice must prevail. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Judge Alan Thatcher took his place at the bench once again. This time, the atmosphere was different, tense but electric, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone present. Ethan Carter was back in court, his hands unshackled, his demeanor more determined than defeated. The motion to reopen his case, filed by none other than Thatcher himself, had sent shockwaves through Portland's legal and law enforcement communities. Detective Martin Hayes sat across the room, flanked by his legal counsel. His face was a mask of calm, but the slight twitch in his jaw betrayed his unease. Thatcher's findings, combined with private investigator David Cole's relentless work, had brought him to this point. It wasn't just Ethan's freedom on the line, it was the integrity of the entire Portland Police Department. As proceedings began, Thatcher remained impartial, though the weight of his personal involvement in uncovering the truth was evident. David Cole, acting as a key witness, took the stand first. He methodically laid out the inconsistencies he'd uncovered, coerced witness testimonies, falsified evidence logs, and the damning surveillance footage that showed Hayes at the scene of the robbery. This isn't just a case of negligence, Cole said firmly, addressing the jury. This was a deliberate effort to frame an innocent man while the true perpetrator walked free. The gallery murmured as Cole presented the burner phone records and the emails retrieved from Hayes's account. One email, in particular, detailed Hayes's plan to pin the robbery on Ethan, leveraging the teacher's lack of an alibi and clean record to make him a scapegoat. The evidence was as clear as it was infuriating. Ethan took the stand next. His voice trembled at first but grew steadier as he recounted his experience, his arrest, the trial, and the months he'd spent behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. I lost everything, he said, his voice cracking. My job, my reputation, and my freedom, but what I haven't lost is my belief that the truth matters. That's why I'm here. His words struck a chord with everyone in the room, even the most skeptical onlookers. For Thatcher, it was a moment of vindication. He'd risked everything, his career, his reputation, even his safety, to ensure Ethan had this chance to speak his truth. Detective Hayes was called to testify, but his confident veneer began to crack under cross-examination. When pressed about the burner phone, he stumbled. When shown the surveillance footage, his denial seemed hollow, and when presented with the emails, his silence spoke louder than words. The prosecution, now representing the state against Hayes, painted a picture of a corrupt officer who had abused his power to manipulate the system. Hayes had not only framed Ethan but had used similar tactics in other cases, ensuring convictions at the expense of justice. As the trial concluded, Thatcher addressed the courtroom. His voice, steady but laden with emotion, carried the weight of decades of experience and the recent revelations that had shaken him to his core. This case is a reminder that the pursuit of justice is not infallible. It requires vigilance, accountability, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Mr. Carter's wrongful conviction is a failure of the system, a failure we must not allow to happen again. With that, Thatcher granted the motion to overturn Ethan's conviction. The gallery erupted into applause and tears as Ethan stood free at last. His mother rushed forward to embrace him, her sobs of relief echoing through the room. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Detective Hayes was arrested and faced numerous charges, including evidence tampering, perjury, and obstruction of justice. An independent investigation into the Portland Police Department revealed a culture of corruption that extended beyond Hayes, sparking a wave of reforms and public outcry. Ethan, though scarred by the ordeal, refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he used his newfound freedom as a platform for change. He began speaking out about the flaws in the justice system and advocating for others who had been wrongfully convicted. Judge Thatcher, now nearing retirement, reflected on the case that had changed his life. He knew his decision to pursue the truth had come at a cost. He'd faced threats, professional backlash, and sleepless nights. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a judge, he was a guardian of justice. One evening, as Thatcher walked out of the courthouse for the last time, he saw Ethan waiting for him. "I just wanted to say thank you," Ethan said, his voice steady but sincere. "For believing in me, for doing what was right." Thatcher nodded, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me. The truth was always there. I just had to find it." As they parted ways, Thatcher couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead was long, but this victory was a reminder that change was possible, that justice, though fragile, was worth fighting for. With the courtroom empty and the city settling into the quiet hum of the evening, the legacy of Ethan Carter's case lingered, a beacon of hope and a call for accountability. For those who believed in the power of truth, it was a story that would resonate for years to come.